The meeting room buzzed with the quiet rhythm of productivity, pen scratches, laptop clicks, the occasional muted cough. I was halfway through a pitch when my phone vibrated in my bag. I almost ignored it, but something about the timing made me pause. I slid it out discreetly and glanced at the screen. Grant. My husband. Or so I thought, until 5 minutes later. I excused myself with a polite smile and ducked into the corridor, the kind with floor-to-ceiling windows that made you feel like you were floating above the Chicago skyline. I answered with a hint of irritation, already bracing for some domestic inconvenience he thought couldn't wait. But his voice, oh, that voice oozed with smugness I hadn't heard before. Hey, Nat. Just wanted to give you a heads up. I filed for divorce this morning. There was no soft lead-in. No explanation. Just that. Cold and clipped, like it was a business transaction. My breath caught, but I didn't let it shake me. I pressed a hand against the cool glass, anchoring myself. Excuse me? You heard me. He actually chuckled, like he was relishing every syllable. Also, sold the condo. Jenna and I need the money. We're looking at places in Malibu. Something beachfront. Fresh start and all. He said her name, Jenna, like I should already know her. Like I should be familiar with the woman he was throwing our life away for. Maybe I was supposed to cry. Maybe I was supposed to scream. But all I did was stare at the skyline, heart pounding but face calm. And you're telling me this, now? He sighed, like I was being dramatic. Look, it's done. You were out of town. The timing worked. No hard feelings, yeah? You'll bounce back. You always do. I let silence stretch, let it hang long enough for him to start squirming on the other end. I knew that tactic drove him nuts when we fought. The void where he expected emotion always unnerved him. That's all? I asked, voice flat. That's it, he said. I'll have my assistant send over the details. Jenna and I are catching a flight to LA later today, so good luck with everything. And just like that, he ended the call. No goodbye. No apology. Not even a trace of guilt. I stood there for a moment, frozen in that glass hallway, heart thudding in my chest like it wanted to break free. I expected devastation to come crashing in, but instead, something else rose. Clarity. Not panic. Not despair. Just a clean, cutting clarity that sliced through the fog. Because as much as Grant thought he had cornered me, as much as he believed he'd pulled off a final, victorious blow, I knew something he didn't. And that changed everything. I slid the phone back into my bag, smoothed my blazer, and walked calmly back into the meeting room. The team was still discussing projections and market trends. My seat was still waiting for me. Nothing looked different, but everything had shifted. I nodded as my colleague handed the clicker back to me, and I picked up right where I'd left off. The numbers made sense. The strategy held. My voice didn't waver. But in the back of my mind, there was a silent drumbeat. He thinks he's sold the condo. He thinks Jenna is getting a fresh start. He thinks he blindsided me. Let him think it. I smiled as I wrapped up my presentation, even managed to field a joke about how I always made numbers sound exciting. They had no idea that while I was breaking down ROI metrics, my entire life was fracturing, and I wasn't just surviving it. I was preparing. When the meeting ended, I slipped out before anyone could pull me aside for more small talk. I made it to the elevator, hit the button for the lobby, and leaned back against the mirrored wall. My reflection stared back, composed, alert, a little pale, but not broken. Not even close. Grant had underestimated me for years. He confused kindness for weakness, patience for passivity. And now, standing in the middle of downtown Chicago, I realized just how deep that miscalculation ran. Let him celebrate too soon. Let him pack his Hawaiian shirts and sip champagne with Jenna. Let him think he won. Because while he was making impulsive moves, driven by ego and lust, I had already laid the groundwork. Months ago, during what he assumed was a routine refinance, I'd asked him to sign over full ownership of the condo. He didn't even read the paperwork. Just trusted that I'd taken care of it, like I always did. And I had. Oh, I had. He didn't sell anything. Not legally. Not even close. I hailed a cab back to my hotel, each bump in the road settling my resolve. I wasn't going to react on his terms. I wasn't going to scream or plead or give him the emotional spectacle he expected. I was going to do what I always did, methodically, quietly, and with precision. Only this time, I wasn't protecting him. This time, I was protecting me. Back in my hotel room, I slipped out of my heels and sank into the plush chair by the window, watching streaks of gold paint the Chicago skyline. My phone was still in my hand, screen dark now, as if even it was stunned by the audacity of Grant's call. I didn't replay his words. I didn't need to. They were branded on my mind, sharp and ridiculous, like a bad plot twist in a soap opera. He thought he'd blindsided me. That he'd snatched the rug out from under me, right in the middle of my work trip, like he was some kind of cunning strategist playing chess while I was stuck at checkers. He really didn't know who he was married to. I exhaled slowly, the tension that had clung to my shoulder since the call finally beginning to ease. Because the truth, the real, delicious, private truth, was that the condo he so smugly believed he'd sold out from under me, it wasn't his to sell. Not anymore. It hadn't been for months. I rose and crossed to the desk, pulling my laptop from my briefcase. The refinance documents were saved in a folder labeled simply Assets. I opened them, letting my eyes skim the familiar lines. There it was in black and white. Natalie Marie Shaw, sole legal owner of the Riverside Heights condo. Signed and notarized. Grant's signature right beneath mine, big, loopy, carelessly confident. He hadn't read a word. I remembered the day perfectly. He'd been annoyed about some billing mix-up on his car lease, distracted by his phone and a protein shake order that got delivered late. I slid the papers across the kitchen counter and said, "Just sign here, it's for the refinance. Lower rate." And he, trusting that I'd handled everything as usual, signed without asking a single question. He'd always called me the organized one, the detail person, the planner. It was meant as a compliment, I think, though sometimes it sounded like a dismissal. I was the one who remembered to pay property taxes, who scheduled repairs, who knew where every document in our life lived. He liked being free of those responsibilities, like they weighed down his so-called creativity. But that carelessness? That assumption I'd never act on my own? That was about to cost him more than he could imagine. I took a sip of the hotel water, then leaned back, the papers still glowing on the screen. He'd probably told Jenna they had a place to live. Maybe even shown her photos of the living room, the skyline view. Maybe he'd promised to hang that ridiculous surfboard art piece she loved. I let myself imagine them walking through a real estate office, Grant charming the buyer with his salesman swagger, laughing about his soon-to-be ex, who wouldn't see it coming. I bet he looked proud of himself. Arrogant. Untouchable. But he'd sold an illusion. A fantasy built on ignorance and ego. And soon, that fantasy would collapse around him. I clicked into my email and drafted a quick note to myself, outlining next steps. Notify Brielle. Pull the legal copy of the deed. Have the buyer's information ready. Grant had thought this would be the moment I crumbled, but all he'd done was accelerate my timeline. I closed the laptop and walked over to the minibar, pulling out the tiniest bottle of champagne they offered. I popped it open, poured it into the short glass on the dresser, and raised it to no one. "To your downfall," I whispered. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about seeing clearly, finally, how far gone he was. The man I'd loved, the man I'd built a home with, was gone long before Jenna entered the picture. His betrayal just confirmed what my instincts had already whispered. He was reckless, entitled, and drunk on the idea that I would always pick up his pieces. He used to say we made a great team, that we balanced each other. But teams don't pull the trigger and run. I took a slow sip, the bubbles fizzing against my lips. This was the moment that would have shattered me once. When I was younger, more fragile, more invested in keeping the illusion intact. But not anymore. Now, I saw every one of his choices for what they were. Desperate attempts to play powerful in a life where he'd contributed so little of substance. He thought the condo would be his victory. But it would be the beginning of his unraveling. And I wouldn't need to lift a finger. Just let the truth speak. He had no idea what was coming. By the time I left Chicago, the skies had turned gray, low-hanging clouds pressing against the plane window like a warning. But I felt oddly calm. Not happy, this wasn't the kind of victory you celebrate with confetti, but steady. Focused. Grant thought he'd trapped me. Instead, he'd stumbled into a minefield he didn't even know existed. The moment I landed, I called Brielle. She picked up on the second ring, breathless, like she'd been running. Nat, hey. How was? I need you to listen and not interrupt until I'm finished. The tone of my voice must have hit something in her because she didn't say another word. I moved quickly, detailing the call from Grant, his claim that he sold the condo, and the fact that he'd filed for divorce. I laid out what I knew, what I suspected, and then, most importantly, what he didn't know. He signed over the deed during the refinance, I said, slowly, carefully. The condo is in my name. Solely. Silence stretched on the other end. I pictured her pushing her glasses up, pacing her office with her legal pad in hand. He did what? She finally asked, voice sharp now. He signed the deed over and tried to sell it? He has no legal right to it, I said, the corner of my mouth curling upward. But he doesn't know that yet. Brielle's laugh was half disbelief, half scorched earth fury. Oh, we're going to ruin him. I exhaled, tension bleeding out of me. I don't want drama. I want it handled. Quietly, cleanly, legally. You got it, she said. First thing, we need to find out who the buyer is. If this was a legitimate sale attempt, there will be documents filed. He must have faked some kind of paperwork. Fraudulent, obviously. He probably handed them a photocopy of the original deed, I said, already moving through my mental checklist. He still had a copy of the one with both our names before the refinance. Well, too bad that version's irrelevant, Brielle said. Let me dig into public filings and find out if anything's pending with the county. If he tried to rush a sale, it might still be in limbo. That gives us time to block it. Perfect. I'll send you the updated deed as soon as I get back to my apartment. Wait, are you okay? She added suddenly, her voice softening. I mean, I know you're handling it, but… Jesus, Natalie. I paused at the curb as a black car pulled up. I'm okay, I said honestly. Really? I think I've been preparing for this longer than I realized. There was a beat of silence before she said, You're stronger than him. Smarter, too. I don't need to be stronger. I just need to be precise. Damn right, she said. I'll call you in 2 hours with an update. I slid into the backseat of the car and gave the driver my address. As the city rolled by, I opened my email and pulled up the documents again. My name gleamed on that deed like a quiet weapon. All this time, Grant had thought I was some background character in his life. The one who cooked, managed the calendar, stayed behind when he chased yet another half-baked business idea. I let him believe that. Let him build a fantasy where he was the star. But now? Now it was my story. By the time I reached the condo, the air had shifted. It wasn't mine because of a signature, it felt mine. Like the walls had been waiting for me to return with open eyes. I walked from room to room with purpose, pulling open drawers, collecting every stray document that might have been left behind. Tax forms, outdated lease agreements, business receipts from his doomed sneaker startup. All of it would go to Brielle. I reached the home office, his supposed sanctuary, and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a manila folder labeled condo. I flipped it open. Bingo. A copy of the old deed. The one with both our names. A few scattered sticky notes with numbers and scribbled reminders. One said, Close with Ben Thursday. Ben. That must be the buyer or agent. I snapped a photo and texted it to Brielle with a simple message. Found this in the desk. She responded within seconds, on it. I closed the drawer, straightened the room, and stood there for a moment, letting it all settle. This was no longer just about the condo. It was about a pattern, Grant's endless belief that nothing had consequences, that charm could outpace responsibility. Well, charm was no match for facts. I returned to the living room, sat on the couch we once picked out together and felt nothing. Not nostalgia, not sadness, just clarity. Let him try to spin his story. Let him panic when the sale hits a legal wall. Let Jenna start asking questions. All I had to do was move methodically, like I always did. And this time, I wasn't just cleaning up his mess. I was making sure it stuck to him. The key turned in the lock like it always had, but this time it felt different. Not because anything in the condo had changed physically. It still smelled faintly of bergamot from the diffuser in the hallway, still held the same soft lighting and sleek furniture Grant used to boast about to friends, but because I had changed. The moment I stepped over the threshold, I wasn't the same woman who left for Chicago. I had been gutted, yes, but I had also been sharpened. I closed the door behind me gently, pressing my back against it for a breath. There was a time when I would have fallen apart right here. I would have slid to the floor, surrounded by the remnants of what should have been a life built on mutual trust and growth. But not this time. Not today. I walked slowly through the condo, running my fingers over surfaces as if reacquainting myself with something that had never truly belonged to me until now. This space, once shared, once negotiated over, was entirely mine. It was no longer just the setting of my betrayal, it was going to become the foundation of my healing. But first, I needed to face the quiet. The aching, empty stillness that comes when chaos pauses and you're left with only yourself and your thoughts. I dropped my suitcase by the bedroom door and changed into soft leggings and a hoodie. My armor for the night. No makeup, no earrings, just me. I curled onto the sofa with a blanket and let my mind drift, not toward the betrayal, but toward something more important: power. Grant had done what so many men like him do when their ego starts to rot from the inside out. He confused recklessness with bravery, entitlement with strategy. And like most who live in that delusion, he assumed I would react with hysteria. He expected tears, calls, begging. Maybe even apologies. But what he got instead was silence. That silence wasn't weakness. It was preparation. I wasn't spiraling. I wasn't stuck in loops of how could he, or why me. I knew why. Because he thought I wouldn't fight back. Because he mistook composure for fragility. Because I had made his life so comfortable, he forgot I had my own strength. I picked up my phone, still filled with texts from Brielle about the legal prep, and scrolled past Grant's name. He hadn't messaged yet. Maybe he was still too wrapped up in his fantasy with Jenna. Or maybe he was waiting to see if I'd call first. The thing about cowards is that they always assume their cowardice will go unnoticed. I set the phone down and stood, moving toward the kitchen. I needed tea. Something grounding. As the kettle warmed, I watched the steam begin to swirl, reminding me of the breathwork exercises I'd started practicing during quarantine. I hadn't thought about those in a while. But now they felt necessary again. I inhaled slowly, counted to 4, then exhaled just as slow. Control. I wasn't looking to win some petty war. I wasn't interested in dragging Grant through the mud, even if he deserved it. What I wanted, what I needed, was to feel rooted in myself again. I wanted to be the version of Natalie who didn't exist in relation to a man. Not Grant's wife. Not the one he left for someone younger. Not even the one who got even. Just Natalie. Clear, intentional, powerful. I sipped my tea and walked to the window, looking out over the city lights. Below, the world moved on, cars crawling through intersections, people laughing on sidewalks, someone walking a golden retriever with a red leash. Life continued. It always did. And so would I. I pulled a notebook from the side table drawer and opened to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote, reclaim. Just that one word. Then I listed everything I would do in the next 3 days. 1. Get updated copies of all legal documents from Brielle. 2. Begin packing Grant's things into boxes neatly, unemotionally. 3. Change the locks. Tomorrow morning. 4. Remove that hideous canvas art he insisted on. 5. Replace the couch pillows. Something bold. Mine. Each item was small, but together they formed a pattern, a reclaiming not just of space, but of identity. I wasn't trying to erase what had happened. I wasn't pretending the betrayal didn't slice deep. But I also wasn't giving it power over me. Pain doesn't get to define the architecture of my life. I do. I finished the tea and placed the mug gently in the sink, the sound of ceramic on porcelain a quiet punctuation to the evening. Then I headed to bed, not to lie awake spinning and hurt, but to rest. Because tomorrow wasn't just another day. It was the beginning of the shift. No more reacting. Now I was moving forward. I was folding laundry in silence when I heard the key turn in the front door. My breath paused. Grant still had a copy. I hadn't changed the locks yet, something Brielle had warned me to do immediately, but I'd waited, half expecting this moment. And now it was here. He stepped in like he owned the place, eyebrows already raised in performative disbelief. I didn't flinch. I folded a sweatshirt slowly and set it in the basket before turning to face him. What the hell is going on, Natalie? He snapped, the door still open behind him. Why is the buyer saying the sale is void? What did you do? No hello. No apology. Straight to accusation. It was so painfully predictable, I almost laughed. I motioned toward the kitchen table where a single manila folder sat waiting. Close the door if you're going to yell. No need for the neighbors to hear you humiliate yourself. He hesitated, then shut it harder than necessary. You're playing games now? No. I'm presenting facts. He followed me to the table. I stayed standing, arms calmly crossed, as he opened the folder. I watched the shift in his expression as he scanned the document. The updated deed. His signature, plain as day. My name, standing alone on the title. Legal. Irrefutable. He looked up, color draining from his face. This, you tricked me. I raised a brow. You mean you didn't read what you were signing during the refinance you barely showed up for? That's not trickery, Grant. That's negligence. He stepped back, visibly rattled. This can't hold up. I was on the original deed. And then you signed it over. Voluntarily. Not under duress. Not without explanation. You chose not to read it. That's not my fault. He opened his mouth, but I cut in before he could speak. And before you ask, yes, Brielle has copies. Yes, it's filed with the county. Yes, the sale you attempted is invalid. The buyer has been notified, the paperwork blocked, and you may want to prepare for potential fraud charges if you try that stunt again. His jaw clenched. I didn't know. Exactly, I said softly. You didn't know. Because you didn't think you had to. We stood there, a chasm of truth opening between us. He wasn't used to this version of me. The quiet, direct, legally armed woman who didn't flinch when he raised his voice. For years, he'd relied on me to smooth over the mess, to put out the fires he lit without thinking. He didn't know how to stand in the ashes. He looked around the condo like he might find comfort in the furniture, like the walls themselves might side with him. This isn't right, he muttered. You're just doing this to punish me. Punishment would have been letting the sale go through and suing you after. This is protection. You brought chaos into my life. I'm drawing a line. He paced a few steps, then stopped, rubbing the back of his neck. I thought we could handle this like adults. I couldn't help it. I laughed. A single, dry sound. You blindsided me with divorce over the phone, declared you sold our home while I was out of state, and did it all with a smug little grin. You didn't come to me like an adult. You came to me like a con artist who thought he got away with it. I didn't cheat the system. You tried. And you failed. We stood in silence again. The air between us was sharp, electric. He was unraveling now, beginning to feel the edges of consequences prick at his skin. I'll get a lawyer, he said finally. Good, I replied. I already have one. That rattled him further. His bravado slipped an inch. You really think you're going to come out of this the good guy? No, I said, walking past him, calm and slow. I'm not aiming to be the good guy. I'm aiming to be free. He flinched like I'd slapped him. I picked up the laundry basket and moved to the bedroom. Your things are being packed. I'd appreciate it if you came back for them tomorrow. In the meantime, please leave your key on the counter before you go. He didn't move. Just stood there like a man who finally realized the game was over and he'd lost without ever learning the rules. This used to be our home, he said quietly, as if that truth might soften me. No, I corrected. It was mine. I just let you live in it. And with that, I left him in the living room, surrounded by his arrogance, stripped bare by the truth, powerless in the one place he thought he ruled. The first voicemail came an hour after Grant left. His voice was tense, brittle around the edges. "Natalie, we need to talk." I didn't know. I didn't mean for it to go down like that. He didn't leave a return number. Didn't need to. I could feel the panic creeping into his tone like a slow leak. The second came just after midnight. "Look, I'm sorry, okay? Just call me back. We can fix this. We can figure something out." I didn't listen to the third. Instead, I set the phone on silent, dropped it into the nightstand drawer, and turned over in bed. My eyes traced the outline of the ceiling, familiar shadows stretching across the walls. For the first time in weeks, I slept like I wasn't being hunted. Because I wasn't. The chase was over. In the morning, I texted Brielle with an update. He came. Saw the deed. Stormed out. Left a few voicemails. I didn't respond. Her reply came fast. "Perfect. We're prepping the divorce filing today. You're about to hit the ground running." I smiled faintly. I wasn't just running. I was finally leaving the wreckage behind. Later that day, Zara showed up at my door with coffee, bagels, and that laser-sharp look in her eyes that always meant business. "So," she said as she walked in without waiting for an invitation, "I hear we're packing up the remains of a man-child." I chuckled, grateful. "That's exactly what we're doing." We started in the closet. I handed her one of Grant's ridiculous vintage bomber jackets, one he claimed was a rare collector's piece and wore maybe twice. "You want to burn it or donate it?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Let's be the bigger people," I said, folding it neatly and placing it into a donation box. Zara made a show of wiping a fake tear from her cheek. So noble. We moved room by room, boxing up everything that belonged to him, his weights under the bed, his endless rows of cologne bottles, his gaming headset tangled behind the TV. Each item I touched lost a little of its weight. It wasn't sentimental anymore. It was just clutter. We found a stack of mail he hadn't bothered to open, mostly credit card offers and outdated flyers. I tossed them into the trash without reading. Let his new life catch up with the paperwork. "You're handling this better than I expected," Zara said, taping up a box labeled office junk. "I spent the last few days grieving a version of him that never really existed," I said, placing the box next to the others. "Now I'm just making space." She looked at me for a long moment. "He really didn't know what he gave up, did he?" "No," I said. "And he still doesn't. He thinks he's chasing freedom. What he's actually running from is himself." By late afternoon, every trace of him was boxed and lined neatly by the front door. The space felt lighter, like it had been exorcised. Even the air was different, no longer tinged with the scent of his cologne or the echo of his complaints. We stood in the middle of the living room, breathing it in. "You're going to be okay," Zara said softly, and for the first time, I truly believed it. "Better than okay," I whispered. That night, after Zara left, I opened the divorce packet Brielle had couriered over. Every page was crisp and final. His name printed in sterile, sharp font. I skimmed through the details, division of assets, official declarations, timelines. Every word felt like a step toward peace. I didn't hesitate. I signed. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about closure, not really. It was about reclaiming space, inside my home, inside my chest, inside my future. Grant no longer got to dictate the narrative. He didn't get to twist my silence into guilt or my grace into weakness. I placed the signed documents into the return envelope and sealed it shut with steady hands. By the time I slipped into bed, my phone had 6 more missed calls and 3 voicemails. I didn't listen. Whatever Grant had to say no longer mattered. He was talking to the version of me that used to chase peace at any cost. That woman didn't live here anymore. The new one? She was building something. Not a wall. Not armor. A life. One box, one paper, one breath at a time. I was in the middle of rearranging the bookshelf, removing all the titles Grant claimed made him look intellectual, but had never once opened, when the intercom buzzed. I froze for a second. No one had called up. No text. No heads up. Just the harsh, mechanical buzz that echoed a little too loud in the silence of my now clean living room. I walked over slowly, pressed the button. Yes, it's Grant, he said. And then, like she had no idea she wasn't welcome, I heard her voice, and Jenna. Of course. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I just stared at the little speaker, heart steady. So, this was how they were going to play it. Show up uninvited, thinking they could barge back into my home and reclaim what he believed he'd lost. I pressed the button again. You're not coming up. Natalie, Grant said, voice rising, we just want to talk. I don't think you understand the situation. Oh, I do, I replied. You, however, clearly don't. Natalie, Jenna cut in, her voice soft, overly sweet. I know this is awkward, but we're all adults here. Grant told me everything. We just want to get our things and move in peacefully. I laughed. Out loud. Move in? I asked, voice sharp. You think you're moving in? There was a pause on the other end. I could feel the confusion blooming through the wire. Yes, Grant said slowly. The condo is sold. We have a contract. No, you had a lie, I said, enunciating each word. And you built a fantasy on top of it. I released the button and walked away. The intercom buzzed again. Once, twice, then silence. But 5 minutes later, I heard a knock on the door. I took my time opening it. And there they stood, Grant in a fitted navy coat he probably bought for this dramatic re-entry, and Jenna, wearing a pristine cream turtleneck and designer sunglasses, even though it was cloudy. She clutched a small handbag like she was stepping into a brunch spot, not the home of the woman her boyfriend betrayed. What do you want? I asked, keeping the door half open. Grant's confidence faltered just enough for me to notice. He gestured to the boxes lined against the hallway wall. I came to collect my things. You should have called ahead, I said. I figured we'd handle this in person. You figured wrong. Jenna stepped forward, trying for warmth. Look, Natalie, I'm really sorry for how all of this happened, but we're just here to get started on our next chapter. Grant said you'd already moved on. My eyes narrowed. He told you I moved on? She blinked. Yes. He said you agreed to sell the place. That you were understanding. Understanding. I held her gaze for a beat longer than was polite, then turned to Grant. You lied to her? He looked down. Let me be very clear, I said, stepping fully into the doorway now, blocking their view of the condo behind me. Grant doesn't own this place. He signed over the deed months ago. The attempted sale was invalid. Fraudulent, even. You, Jenna, were never moving in. This home is mine. Every inch of it. Her mouth dropped slightly, a stunned little O that quickly closed into a thin, humiliated line. You didn't tell her, I said, almost amused now. You dragged her here thinking you could bluff your way in. Nat, come on, Grant muttered, his confidence unraveling by the second. Jenna turned on him. You said it was handled. You said she was fine with it. I thought she was, he snapped. She's just being vindictive. Oh, am I? I asked, folding my arms. Because protecting my property from a man who tried to steal it seems pretty rational to me. Jenna took a step back. You lied, she said again, quieter this time. You told me it was yours. You said she didn't want it anymore. Grant flailed. I thought I could fix it. She turned sharply and started walking away. He grabbed her arm. Wait, Jenna. She shrugged him off without looking back. He stared after her for a second, torn, humiliated, speechless. Then he turned back to me. You don't have to do this like this. Yes, Grant. I do. I reached behind the door, grabbed the smallest box labeled Grant, bedroom, and handed it to him. Take this and leave. I'll have the rest delivered. You're not welcome here. Not anymore. He took the box with both hands, eyes flicking past me into the space that used to be his. You're making a mistake, he said. No, I said. I'm fixing one. Then I shut the door in his face. Quietly, deliberately, and locked it behind him. Let him walk away. Let him carry his lies, his consequences, and his box of broken fantasies back to whatever mess he'd made. I didn't need to slam the door. The silence did it for me. I waited for the knock before I opened the door. Grant stood there, alone this time, with his posture sagging just slightly. The cocky grin he'd worn days ago was long gone. In its place was something less defined, something desperate. He didn't speak right away. His eyes darted past me into the condo, as if he still half expected to see his name etched into the walls. I said nothing, just stepped aside, giving him one last chance to collect what remained of his belongings. He stepped in, clutching a canvas bag that looked far too empty for a man who'd assumed he'd be moving in permanently. He barely looked at me, like he wasn't sure which version of me he'd find. The one who once forgave him for being late to our anniversary dinner 3 years in a row? The one who used to ask how his day went before mentioning my own? That woman was gone, and even he could feel the absence. The final box sat by the dining room table, labeled neatly, Office plus Miscellaneous. I didn't rush him. I wanted him to see it all. The space no longer shaped around him. The couch cushions he hated were gone, replaced with rich, bold colors. His framed prints of vintage sports memorabilia had been taken down, leaving bare walls now adorned with artwork I'd picked with intention. The silence between us wasn't heavy. It was instructional. He knelt to tape the box shut, his hands fumbling with the edges. I stood across the room, arms crossed, watching. Every movement he made told me this wasn't about the box. This was the last act in a script he never expected to end like this. He thought he'd walk away victorious. Instead, he was just walking away. I don't know what I was thinking, he finally said, not looking up. I messed it all up. I didn't answer. He needed to sit in the echo of his own confession for a moment. I thought I could have both, he continued. A new start and somehow still have you not hate me. I don't hate you, I said. He looked up, startled. I don't, I repeated. But I don't owe you anything either. He swallowed hard, like that truth stung more than anything I could have screamed. You always made everything look so easy, he said, his voice low. The way you handled life. The bills. The house. Us. I didn't realize how much you were holding until you stopped. That's because you didn't care to look, I replied. He didn't deny it. I kept thinking I'd fix things eventually, he added. That you'd still be there. That I could just waltz back in and pick up where you left off? I shook my head. You didn't just break trust, Grant. You gambled with it. And you lost. He stood up slowly, lifting the box. His arms trembled slightly from the weight, or maybe it was the weight of everything else he couldn't carry anymore. Is there anything else? He asked. I reached over to the counter and picked up a manila envelope, crisp and unmistakable. His eyes went wide when he saw it. This is the divorce paperwork, I said, placing it in his free hand. Brielle already filed. But you need to sign this copy. I want everything finalized. He stared at it, silent. Then, with a slow nod, he set the box down and opened the envelope. His signature, so familiar, so rushed in years past, now took more time, his pen dragging slowly across the line. By the end of today, I added, I expect you gone. Entirely. His shoulders slumped as he closed the envelope and handed it back. You're not even angry. I was, I said. But that burned out. Now I just want my peace. He lingered by the door. I could feel him wanting to ask me something else, something pathetic like, can we still talk? Or do you still think about us? But he didn't. Instead, he lifted the box again, pulled the door open, and took one last look over his shoulder. I hope she makes you happy, I said before he could speak. Because you gave up a lot to chase her. Just make sure you don't treat her like a backup plan the moment she disappoints you. He flinched. And then he was gone. I stood at the door, listening for his steps to fade. They did slowly, unevenly, like someone trying not to fall apart in public. I didn't cry. I didn't second-guess it. I closed the door, slid the bolt across, and leaned against the wood. It was done. This wasn't revenge. This was accountability. This was closure on my terms. And it was just the beginning. The first morning after Grant left for good, I woke up before my alarm. The light was soft, spilling through the windows in ribbons of gold and cream, touching everything like it was blessing the new version of this place of me. I stayed in bed for a moment longer, just listening. There was no snoring from the other side. No toothbrush tapping against the sink. No ESPN humming from the living room television. Just silence. Clean. Absolute. It didn't feel empty. It felt spacious. I slipped out of bed and padded barefoot into the kitchen. The old coffee maker I'd fought to keep was gone. Grant took it, probably thinking he was doing me a favor. Instead, I bought a sleek new French press that looked better on the counter and made every cup feel like a ritual. I ground the beans myself, poured the boiling water, watched the bloom rise and settle. Even this felt like a reclamation. With the mug warming my hands, I wandered the condo slowly. Not to take inventory, but to begin again. Each room needed to change, not just physically, but energetically. I didn't want reminders tucked into corners, ghosts waiting in drawers. In the bedroom, I stripped the bed down to the mattress and threw out the old sheets, the ones we'd picked together during some discount sale years ago. I ordered a new set in slate gray, soft as butter, and chose a matching duvet that felt like a cloud. New pillows, new throw blanket, new everything. I'd lived in a shared space long enough. This was going to be mine. Zara came over that weekend with a gallon of paint and Thai takeout. She wore old sweats and a bandana and barely paused before saying, "So what color are we doing the office?" "Emerald green," I said. "Bold," she grinned. "I like it." We spent the afternoon transforming the tiny office from Grant's neglected gaming den into a lush, calming reading nook. The paint brought the walls to life. I moved in my favorite chair, added a floor lamp, and lined the built-in shelves with my own books, the ones I loved, not the ones that made someone else look smart. Each change was small on its own, but together, they felt like steps in a long-overdue journey. The bathroom lost its dark towels and shaving kits. The entryway gained a mirror I actually liked. I lit candles in the evening not because I wanted to mask something, but because I enjoyed the scent of sandalwood curling through the air. Brielle called midweek to confirm that the legal wrap-up was nearly complete. He signed and submitted everything. No fights, no objections. "It's moving fast." "Good," I said, sipping a glass of red wine by the window. "Let it move fast." She paused. "You doing okay?" "I'm better than okay," I said. And I meant it. I stopped responding to Grant's texts 2 weeks ago. They'd started as apologies, evolved into half-hearted jokes, then devolved into silence when he realized I wasn't biting. The last one simply said, "Hope you're happy." I didn't answer. What could I say that I hadn't already said with my actions? Instead, I spent time with Zara. We took walks through Prospect Park, stopped at a little shop in Brooklyn where I bought a ceramic vase that made me inexplicably happy. I filled it with fresh eucalyptus and placed it on the windowsill. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since before the marriage. My entries weren't always profound. Some days, I just listed what I was grateful for. The smell of lavender lotion. A quiet evening. The warmth of sunlight on my face. But some days, I dug deeper. I wrote about the ache that had once lived in my chest like a tenant who refused to leave. I wrote about the moment I realized I'd been making myself small to fit in a life that never really fit me. I wrote about reclaiming my voice. The condo had transformed with me. It no longer felt haunted by what had happened. It breathed easier now, like it had been holding its breath for too long. Just like me. On a Sunday evening, I stood by the kitchen counter, cutting up vegetables for dinner, music playing softly in the background. It wasn't for anyone else. No one to impress. No one to anticipate or accommodate. Just me, nourishing myself in a space that now echoed with clarity instead of compromise. I lit a candle on the table and sat down with my meal, phone flipped face down. No scrolling. No distractions. Just the rhythm of a quiet, whole evening. It struck me then, mid-bite, how different peace felt from the absence of noise. How healing wasn't always loud or cinematic. Sometimes it was a bowl of pasta in a clean home, with no one's energy pulling at your sense of self. This was my new normal. And it was beautiful. The divorce was finalized on a Wednesday morning. I got the email from Brielle while I was tying my hair up, about to water the new plants I'd arranged along the windowsill. The subject line was simple: "It's done." I stared at those 2 words for a long moment, letting them settle in my chest. Not like a blow, but like the release of a held breath. The end had come, not in flames or chaos, but quietly, with legal signatures and court stamps. It didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a conclusion. And more than that, it felt like permission. That evening, I met Zara on a Brooklyn rooftop. She greeted me with a wide grin, holding out a chilled bottle of Prosecco like it was a trophy. "To freedom," she said before I even sat down. "To peace," I added, clinking my glass to hers. We sipped as the city lights came to life around us. Music played softly from someone's portable speaker nearby, and laughter drifted up from the streets below. I watched people move through the night with no idea how different my world had become, how something massive had quietly closed behind me, and something new was stretching open. Zara leaned back in her chair, looking at me like she was seeing a different person. "You really did it," she said. "You walked away with your head high." "I didn't want to," I admitted, swirling the bubbles in my glass. "Not at first. I wanted to scream, throw things, make him feel what I felt. But you didn't." "No. I rewrote the ending instead." She nodded. "I'm proud of you." I smiled and looked out over the skyline. The rooftops shimmered in gold, each window a little square of someone's life. Somewhere out there, Grant might have been starting over too. Maybe still untangling his lies. Maybe realizing what he gave up. But that was no longer my business. When I got home that night, the condo felt completely still, but not empty. It felt lived in. Claimed. Mine. I slipped off my heels and changed into my favorite robe, the one he once called a grandma sweater, but that I always loved for its softness. I brewed a cup of chamomile tea, the kind I used to save for nights when things felt heavy. Only tonight, it wasn't about comfort, it was about ritual. A closing loop. I curled up in my reading chair by the window, surrounded by plants, new pillows, shelves full of the books I actually cared about. I watched the city below, tea warming my hands, and breathed in the silence like it was the final note of a song I'd forgotten I loved. This space didn't just look different. It felt different. It wasn't just that the furniture had changed, or the artwork, or the absence of Grant's cologne. It was the energy, the ownership, the clarity of being here without apology or compromise. I'd spent so much of our marriage making room for him. Now I was finally making room for myself. I picked up my journal and turned to a blank page. At the top, I wrote, "What I know now. 1. Silence is not weakness. 2. Love should not require shrinking. 3. If someone tries to dismantle your life, let them, just make sure it's one you've outgrown. 4. Closure doesn't come from apologies. It comes from reclaiming your story." I closed the journal and set it aside, sipping my tea slowly as the night deepened. I didn't feel hardened by what had happened. I didn't feel bitter or jaded. I felt grounded. Like I'd been pulled through something sharp and emerged smoother, clearer, more certain. This wasn't the life I planned, but it was the one I was building now with intention. Every wall repainted, every drawer organized, every corner touched by my own hands. And it wasn't just about the condo. It was about me. The woman who once dimmed herself to keep the peace. The woman who ignored the small betrayals because they didn't come with fireworks. The woman who thought survival meant staying. She was gone. In her place stood someone softer in spirit but sharper in boundaries. Someone who knew when to speak and when to walk away. Someone who understood that being left wasn't always a loss, it was sometimes the most unexpected liberation. I finished my tea, stood, and turned off the lights. The condo glowed faintly in the dark, shadows casting soft edges over the space that now reflected who I truly was. I walked into the bedroom, slipped beneath the fresh sheets, and pulled the covers around me. As I drifted to sleep, I didn't think of Grant. I didn't think of the past. I thought only of the future, vast and open, full of possibility. What started with betrayal had ended with empowerment. And I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving.